On today's episode of Scratch, we're going to be making country fried steak. As you'll see, I have in front of me a package of cube steak. Cube steak is notorious for being extremely rough, despite the fact that they tenderize it for you beforehand. We're actually going to have to tenderize this a little bit more, but first we want to make sure that we have everything we need. I have a tenderizing mallet. I prefer the metal ones because they're heavier. For the dredge, we have baking powder, Montreal seasoning, some flour, and some baking soda. The baking soda will also be used to tenderize the cube steak a little bit more about halfway through the process. We also have some half and half, an egg, common white vinegar, 2 dredging bowls, a cast iron Dutch oven. I prefer this over the skillet method because there's less splash and you can fry the entire steak at once without having to flip it in between. Some oil for frying and a drip pan when it's done. The first thing we want to do is make sure the oil is heating through thoroughly while everything else is going on. So we want to pour a couple cups of oil in the bottom of the Dutch oven, just enough to coat the top and bottom of the steaks when we put them in. And then we're going to turn the heat on to medium-high. Once the oil starts, we'll go ahead and start getting the dredge ready. Because I have 2 pounds of cube steak, I'm going to take about a cup and a half of flour, which is about all I have in here right now. I'm going to apply a generous amount of the Montreal seasoning. And add to that a teaspoon of baking powder, and a teaspoon of baking soda. The baking powder and the baking soda are going to come into play later by helping to make the chicken fried steak extra crispy and extra flaky. So we're going to whisk that together, making sure to get the spices even. If you think you need to add a few more spices to flavor the dredge, go ahead and do it. And now that I've got the dry dredge ready, I'm going to go ahead and start the liquid dredge. Now for every egg, which is about a 1/4 cup in volume, you're going to want a 1/2 cup of half and half whole milk or cream. So we'll go ahead and get a 1/2 cup of cream added to the egg. And then to give the liquid dredge a little bit of acidity, we're going to eyeball about 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. It's not going to matter if you put in a little too much. The idea is that the vinegar is going to react with the baking soda when we pull it through the dredge and help us get the final results that we want. I'm going to go ahead and whisk together the liquid portion of the dredge. And so you know what to expect. After we get these cube steaks tenderized, we're going to dip them in the flour, then the egg mixture, and then back in the flour. Now, we have to handle these incredibly tough steaks. The first thing we're going to do is re-tenderize them with a hammer. As you can see here, a lot of these puncture marks don't go all the way through. That's part of what contributes to the toughness of the meat. and why we have to make sure it's extra tender. Otherwise, we're going to be chewing on these all night long. So I'm just going to take these out. Some people will cover these with a plastic wrap, but beef doesn't typically splatter as much as poultry, so I don't usually worry about that. I'm just going to take these out. And then I'm going to give them another good hammering. Be sure that you hammer them with the pointy side. This is what breaks up the tough fibers and helps tenderize the meat. Now, I wish that I could say this is all we had to do, but it's not. To further break up the muscle fibers, since these are from a part of the cow that is well worked out, that's why the meat is tough and gamey, we're going to have to rely on a chemical reaction with sodium bicarbonate, also known as baking soda. We're going to use about a teaspoon of baking soda per pound of meat. We have about 2 pounds of meat here. And we're going to sprinkle it over these. And rub it in to those nooks and crannies really good. If you don't rub it in, the baking soda is not going to get where it needs to go to loosen that meat up. We're going to flip them over. And do the same thing to the other side. Now, once the baking soda is rubbed in, we have the difficult option of waiting 20 minutes for the chemical reactions to take place. After about 20 minutes, you're going to want to go ahead and start the cooking process. If you let the sodium bicarbonate sink into the meat for too long, it's going to turn it into mushy, and you'll have the opposite problem. Instead of it being too tough, it'll be so slimy you won't be able to eat it. As stated earlier, we are going to double dredge this. We're going to put it in the flour first, tap off some of the excess, then we're going to put it in the milk and egg mixture, let the excess run off, and then we're going to dredge it in the flour again. Make sure you get it really good for that second dredging. Tap off the excess, and then you put it in the pan. I'm doing these in batches of 2 because of the size of my Dutch oven. It is normal for it to bubble at first. These are also extremely thin cuts of meat, so their cooking times aren't that long. I'm going to dredge the second one. Tap off the excess and drop it in. And then I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes and check them at about 4.5 minutes. After about 4 to 4.5 minutes, you're going to want to check it to make sure it's a nice golden brown color. These look perfect. And then you set them on your sheet to dry. The grating prevents the bottom of the steak from getting soggy as the grease drains off. And you'll want to serve this with your favorite white or brown gravy, which will be featured on some upcoming Scratch shorts.